Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Muhammad Nur Samad. Today our group will present about the financial ratio analysis and 7 intended outcome for KLCC Property Holdings Berhad and SMTrack Berhad. At first, I would like to start with the background of the company. KLCC Property Holdings Berhad is a Malaysian property investment company that was incorporated on 18 August 2004. The company has transformed from a property company to country's largest real estate investment trust and Malaysia's only staple security. In 2012, the company announced a proposal to establish KLCC REIT as a staple structure. On 7th May 2013, the company undertook a corporate restructuring in which it injected into the newly formed KLCC REIT. As a result, KLCCP's shares and KLCC REITs units were stapled to form a KLCCP stapled group. So the company owns and manages retail and hotel properties in Kuala Lumpur, such as the Petronas Twin Towers, the Mandarin Oriental Kuala Lumpur, Minara KLCC, and Surya KLCC, and so on. In addition, the company earned a lots of national and international awards and recognition. SMTrack Berhad is a Malaysian company that was formed, first incorporated on 12 January 2004 as a private limited company under the name of Smart Tech Solution, Centrian Berhad. Then the company converted into public limited company on 2008. And by then, the company changed its name to SMTrack Berhad. Their main activity of business is to provide products and services related to radio frequency identification and other tagging solutions using information technology broadband networks. And the company also provides training and maintenance and consultancy service to its clients all across Malaysia. SMTrack also has 3 subsidiary companies as well as 1 associate company.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Muhammad Rahmani, and I will be presenting the financial ratio aspect of KLCC Property Holdings Berhad and SMTrack Berhad. The table on the left here is the financial results of prior calculations made that were derived from the annual reports of both companies. Well, it can be seen that we had used 4 different categories of ratio, which are liquidity, efficiency, solvency, and profitability. Firstly, liquidity ratio is used to determine a company's ability to pay off current debt obligations. Generally, having a liquidity ratio of 1.0 is considered good, and both companies managed to exceed that. SMTrack slightly outperforms KLCC Properties here, as their figure is barely just edged them out. Efficiency ratio is used to analyze how well a company makes use of its resources. It's also essentially used in measuring the current and short-term performance of a company. Inventory turnover for SMTrack Berhad was not able to be computed due to them not having any inventory in their annual report. So for the most part, there's a stark difference in the performance between the two companies, as SMTrack is seen to have low numbers all across the board. It's clear that KLCC Properties is the more efficient company between the two. Solvency ratio is used to measure a company's capability to meet its long-term debt obligations. This ratio tells the percentage that the company's assets are financed by debt or equity. Higher percentage is considered good for equity but bad for debt. Although it can be seen that SMTrack outperforms KLCC Properties due to the equity ratio, but this may be due to the huge amounts of assets that KLCC Properties own, which have skewed the ratio. Lastly, profitability ratio is used to determine the ability of the company to generate earnings. Generally here, a high number means it is better. So SMTrack has negative figures here due to them incurring net loss for this financial year. Thus, it is clear that KLCC Properties is more profitable. To sum this whole thing up, KLCC Properties is the company that performed better financially for the financial year 2019.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Muhammad Irshad and I'll be presenting intended outcome 1.0. Under IO 1.0, it stated that every company is headed by a board and they are responsible for the company's leadership and also for meeting the objective and goals of the company. There are 5 practices under IO 1.0 and we will look it one by one. The first one is practice 1.1. KLCCP and SMTrack has applied this practice 1.1. The boards of both companies has set strategic plans to ensure that the objective and goals of the company are being met. They take into account the internal and external factors that may influence the company's performance, such as taking into account stakeholders' interests before making decisions. Next is practice 1.2. KLCCP and SMTrack has applied this practice 1.2. The chairman of the board of both companies is responsible for instilling good corporate governance practices, leadership, and also ensure the effectiveness of the board. Next is practice 1.3 of IO 1.0. KLCCP has applied practice 1.3 while SMTrack has departed from this practice. KLCCP has two different individuals who held the position of chairman and CEO, while SMTrack has only one individual who held both positions for chairman and CEO in their companies. Next is practice 1.4, where both companies KLCCP and SMTrack has applied this practice 1.4 in their corporate governance practices. Both companies has appointed a qualified and competent company secretaries to provide assistance in terms of corporate governance matters. Both secretaries in these companies is a fellow of Malaysian Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators, MAICSA. Next is practice 1.5, where both directors of these companies will receive meetings materials within a reasonable period prior to their meetings. For KLCCP, the period is 6 days prior to meeting, while for SMTrack, it is 7 days prior to meeting. Upon conclusion, the minutes will circulate in a timely manner. That's all from me. I'll pass to the next presenter.
The practice for the second intended outcome states that there needs to be a board charter which is regularly reviewed and published on the company's website. The board charter needs to first identify the respective roles and responsibilities of the board, board committees, individual directors, and management. Second, to identify issues and decisions reserved for the board. Both KLCC Property and SMTrack has applied the practice to achieve the second intended outcome. The board charter clearly underlines the various responsibilities of the board committees, and the directors. In addition, the board charter is regularly reviewed to ensure that it is consistent with the goals, relevant laws, procedures of the board.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Tuan Zakwan and I'm going to present about intended outcome 3.0. IO 3.0 focus on the board and can be broken down into three. The first one being the board committed to promoting good business conduct, and the board maintain a healthy corporate culture that engenders integrity, transparency, and fairness. And the last one, the board, management, employees, and other stakeholders are clear on what is considered acceptable behavior and practice in the company. Next, practice 3.1, we can see that both of the company apply the practice in which both of the company have code of conduct that governs the company's directors, management, and employees. In addition to that, KLCC Property also emphasize the concept of discipline, good conduct, loyalty, integrity, and many more. And the company also established awareness of the code programs to the employees, both new employees and existing employees. Last but not least, the company also established integrity pledge to avoid unethical case such as bribe. And the second practice is 3.2, and we can see that both of the company implement whistleblower policy. In addition to that, KLCC Property also implement anti-bribery and corruption manual. The company also established asset declaration form and gift register to also avoid bribery in the company. And the policy and manual for the both company can be obtained from the corporate website. Thank you.
So I will explain the intended outcome 4.0. So for the intended outcome 4.0, board decisions are made objectively in the best interest of the company, taking into account diverse perspective and insight. For practice 4.1, SMTrack applied this practice. However, KLCC Property is departing from this practice. This is because effective in 1 January 2020, the number of non-independent non-executive directors is decreased to 3, and the number of independent directors increased to 3, which make up 42.86% of total directors. Next, for practice 4.2, SMTrack not apply this practice, and KLCC property step up to 4.3. So for the 4.3, the board has a policy which limits the tenure of its independent directors to 9 years, and both companies adopted this practice. And then for this practice, both company has appointed all the boards of the directors with the formal screening and also the formal test and stuff. And KLCC property also assesses board effectiveness and evaluation. And SMTrack also suggests the nominees to NRC. So for the next practice, both companies are departing from this practice. This is because for KLCC property, with the retirement of Dato' Halifah binti Esa, this has reduced the representation of women for 28 to 28.6%. And SMTrack also not disclosed this in its annual report. And then for the next practice, SMTrack is applied for this practice also being adopted by the KLCC property. And then the nominating committee is chaired by independent director, which SMTrack also apply with the chairman of the nominating committee is Encik Mahnuriza bin Berhad, and KLCC property is chaired by the senior independent director, who is also the chairman of this, named as Sheikh Habibah binti Abdul.
For the fifth intended outcome, KLCC property has departed from this practice. For the financial year 2019, the Nomination Recruitment Committee of KLCC property had used an external independent secretarial firm to aid them in assessing the board's effectiveness. The board evaluation was based on personalized questionnaires, incorporating MCCG guiding principles as the appraisal process. The directors also completed the assessment papers of the board and issued their suggestions and recommendations on changes to the board. However, they have yet to wholly use an independent expert to review the board. They expect the first external review is to be undertaken by the end of 2020. SMTrack, on the other hand, has applied this practice. The evaluation of the effectiveness and performance of the board is done annually by its nomination committee. Every party in the board, that is the board itself, its committees, the individual directors, are assessed to ensure that the board is functioning smoothly as a whole. The directors are required to complete comprehensive questionnaires pertaining to the board. The assessment was also facilitated internally.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Azim, so I will present on tender outcome 6, which is on remuneration policies and decision. So for the first practice is on policies and procedure in determining remuneration of directors and senior management. So in this policies and procedure, it must be taken into account the director's performance in the company. For the second practice, which is on remuneration committee, where it must be appointed to implement the remuneration policies and procedure. From our research, we can see that both companies, KLCC and SMTrack, applied these practices, where the KLCC property determining the directors' remuneration based on performance and their roles in the company. Same goes with the SMTrack. For the second practice, both companies appointed remuneration committee in their company to manage their remuneration policies and procedure. So the directors of both companies will not deciding their own remuneration. So in conclusion for this intended outcome 6, both companies follow this fair and transparency in remuneration policies and procedures.
Intended Outcome 7.0 aims to enable stakeholders to assess whether the remuneration of directors and senior management is commensurate with their individual performance while taking into consideration the company's performance. Under the Intended Outcome 7.0, there are two practices and one step-up practice to help the companies to achieve the Intended Outcome 7.0. The first practice prescribes for the company to provide a detailed disclosure on a name basis for the remuneration of individual directors and the breakdown of individual directors' remuneration, which includes fees, salary, bonus, benefits in kind, and other emoluments. Practice 7.2 prescribes that the board of directors disclose on name basis the top 5 senior management's remuneration component, including salary, bonus, benefits in kind, and other emoluments in bands of RM 50,000. And the step-up practice that the Malaysian Code of Corporate Governance prescribed is so that companies are encouraged to fully disclose the detailed remuneration of each member of senior management on a named basis. In assessing the company's application of the practices under intended outcome 7.0, we have determined from each company's corporate governance report that both of the companies applied practice 7.1. However, they departed from practice 7.2, where practice 7.2 encourages that the company to disclose the top 5 senior management's remuneration components. And then, following that point, it stands to reason that as they departed from practice 7.2, the step-up practice of 7.3, where companies are encouraged to fully disclose the detailed remuneration of each member of senior management on a name basis, is not applied. In conclusion, from our evaluation of both of the company's financial ratios and corporate governance report, we believe that the companies fared differently in the evaluation of their financial ratios, which was used to measure their fiscal performance for the financial year 2019. As the two companies are of different scale and compete in two different industries, it stands to reason that computation of the ratios could differ greatly, and further interpretation of those ratios must be done with deliberation. Both of the companies adopted majority of the practices in order to achieve the intended outcomes. The practices that were adopted by both of the companies were explained further in their respective corporate governance report with the intention to display the methods and approaches taken by each company's board. However, as we have seen before, the companies also departed from some of the practices for reasons that they believe was justified and is still in accordance with the Malaysian law. The reasons for the departures were also explained with clarity to ensure that the stakeholders are aware of the board's reason for doing so.